Hello and welcome to Rando Tech Info, and today we're continuing our hands-on history of Android with the original Droid. No, not that Droid, but, fun fact, Verizon did have to ask Lucasfilm for permission to use the term. For those of you who don't know, Droids were a series of phones sold exclusively by Verizon here in the US. The phone that I'm going to be talking about today, the original Motorola Droid, or as some people know as the Droid 1, was known by other names in other parts of the world. For example, outside the US, this phone was usually called the Milestone. And this could just be my own personal taste, but I definitely think Droid is cooler. The Droid line started with this phone back in November of 2009 and ran all the way up to September of 2016. And while Motorola definitely made the lion's share of the Droid devices, HTC got in on some of the action, and heck, even Samsung made one phone in the line called the Droid Charge, which, by the way, happened to be my first smartphone. Now, this is part 2 of a multi-part series on the history of Android. Part 1 was about the T-Mobile G1, which was released 13 months before the original Droid back in October of 2008. So we will definitely be making some comparisons to that phone while we talk about the Droid. And by the way, if you want to see part 1 in its entirety, please feel free to go check that out, and while you do so, feel free to give me a sub to the channel. See how I worked that in there? Smooth.
So why don't we just get on with it?
So let me start off by saying this phone is a brick, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It is a much more solid feeling device and feels like a much better built device than the G1. When I was using the G1, I felt like I had to be a bit careful with it. I had no such feelings when using the Droid. It's heavy and well balanced even when using the physical keyboard, although I do feel like that comes at a bit of a cost. Like the G1 and so many other phones of its day, the Droid had a full physical keyboard. It's a cool feature and definitely better than trying to use the tiny keyboard on the screen, but it's still not great. In my review of the G1, I commented on that keyboard not being the easiest thing to use, but it was definitely easier than using the keyboard on the Droid. You see, on the G1, while the keyboard flipped up farther, which caused it to not balance as well in the hand, it was kind of a bit top heavy, the keys were spaced much farther apart. This made for a much easier typing experience than on the Droid, where, yes, the keyboard only came up about halfway, but as you can see, the keys are much closer together. So for somebody with fat thumbs, it made typing a bit of a chore. Now, while I might have preferred the keyboard on the G1, almost every other hardware feature on the Droid is superior. The 3.7-inch 480 by 854 pixel LCD display on the Droid is a full half an inch bigger than the screen on the G1 with significantly higher resolution. Although the screen will still look like a Tic Tac compared to the screens of most modern day phones. The Droid is powered by the OMAP 3430 by Texas Instruments. Not surprisingly, I was not able to download any benchmark apps to this thing, which is probably for the best since it probably would have melted the sucker. I would say performance-wise, these two devices are actually pretty similar. Apps like Gmail and Google Maps opened up in nearly identical time. However, the Droid does boot up about twice as fast. Other noteworthy specs on the Droid include 256 megabytes of RAM compared to 192 on the G1. Its 256 megabytes of storage puts it on par with the G1, and both phones could use expandable memory. However, the cool thing about the Droid was it came with a micro SD card in the box. The Droid has a single 5 megapixel rear-facing camera, so like the G1, you will need a mirror to take your selfies on this bad boy. Unlike the G1, however, you can digitally zoom with this phone, although the results when doing this are not always stellar. Somewhat impressively, it does take 480p video at 24 frames per second.
Good girl. Okay, you can go lay down again.
And like the G1, has a designated physical camera button that both opens the app and snaps your photos. Other exterior buttons, other than the keyboard of course, include the side volume rocker and the power button, but that's it. The physical buttons found on the front of the G1 have been replaced on the Droid with buttons built into the bottom of the screen. These buttons do provide haptic feedback when you use them, so they keep that more tactile feel. The Droid is a little thinner than the beefy G1, but it's still much thicker than modern day smartphones. Still, its 4.5 by almost 2.5 inch footprint fits nicely in the pocket and the removable back and replaceable battery are welcome features of a bygone era. A couple of final things worth mentioning about the hardware. Unlike the G1, this phone has a headphone jack. It also uses a micro USB port instead of the mini USB found on the G1, and while the side location of the port is a bit odd, it's not entirely unique for phones of its day. Now moving on to the UI. Out of the box, this thing was running 2.1, better known at the time as Eclair, but it could be upgraded to 2.2 Froyo. And while there weren't a lot of obvious upgrades over the G1's Android donut, the addition of digital zoom on the camera, support of Bluetooth 2.1, and double tap to zoom in the browser were certainly noteworthy. In the settings, you have quite a few options, including but not limited to connecting to Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, customizing your volume levels, disabling animations, choosing your screen lock options, and selecting from quite a surprisingly wide variety of ringtones. Unfortunately, like the G1, I was not able to use the Google Play Store or download a different browser so I could get new apps. However, a lot of the apps on the phone still worked, like the alarm clock, the MP3 player, and Google Maps. One cool additional thing that worked on this device was Google Navigation, so I could actually use it to get directions. So what are my thoughts about the original Motorola Droid? Well, I think it was a very useful and well-built device for back in its day. It has a lot of the features that we still use on phones today, and it has some features that we've lost, like a headphone jack and removable batteries. And while the Droid isn't quite as impressive a technological leap over the G1 as the G1 was to the phones that came before it, it was still unquestionably the phone that brought Android to the masses. It took the G1 6 months to reach 1 million units sold. It took the original Droid only 74 days to reach 1 million units sold. It reached that number even faster than the original iPhone. As for using the phone in the present day, look, living the 2009 smartphone life is not nearly as cool as living the 2021 smartphone life. However, I'm still glad I did it. Like after I used the G1, it made me really appreciate just how good our mobile devices are now and how well they do at keeping us connected to the people that we care about. Finally, if you had this phone back in the day, or any other Droid phone for that matter, please feel free to share those experiences down in the comments. I would love to hear them. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. Thanks for watching, and until next time, this is Rando Tech Info, signing out.